Peter Schiff, Senate candidate. I'd like to introduce him. American author, businessman, financial news commentator, video blogger, non-professional economist, and a 2010 candidate for the U.S. Senate. Schiff is a periodic guest on financial news television and is a host and guest on internet radio. Schiff was an economic advisor to Ron Paul's 2008 presidential campaign. He supported Paul's economic revitalization plan to save, media plan that stimulates savings and production, not more of the reckless, war-related consumption that got us into this mess in the first place. And with that introduction, Peter Schiff. As long as you've got air.
Well, that's dangerous. All right, I guess I don't have to give you guys any bridge versions. Talk a little bit more. So anyway, I am not a politician. I am a business person. I own a brokerage firm called Euro Pacific Capital. We do retail brokerage for individuals like yourselves, people with their retirement accounts, individual accounts. I do asset management. I do investment banking. I have a couple of mutual funds. And what's very unique, I think, about my approach to investing is I'm very macroeconomic oriented. I'm very top down, and I really pay attention to what governments are doing. And I invest around the world, and so I want to understand how governments can inhibit or contribute to prosperity, economic growth, and generally the way that governments contribute is by staying out. And recognizing that government is a barrier to prosperity, and the smaller the government, the wealthier the society. So the idea is to keep the government's role limited, which was what our founding fathers envisioned when they wrote the Constitution, and they tried to cage up the government within the Constitution. And so if you have governments that have very low spending, low taxes, they don't regulate a lot, they leave the markets as free as possible, those countries are going to be as prosperous as possible. Unfortunately, for the last decade, I've really been playing defense for my clients to try to protect their wealth from everything that Washington is doing to destroy it. From the Federal Reserve that has kept interest rates consistently too low, that has helped undermine the value of our money. They have consistently monetized government deficit spending, making it easier for governments to spend more than they collect in taxes. But as they do that, they push down the value of the dollar. 10 years ago, an ounce of gold was $250 an ounce. Today it crossed through $1,200. It's a new record high. It's going a lot higher. That is a function of our money losing value. The price of gold shows you how much value our money is losing. Also, it's not just the Federal Reserve that's been undermining our economy. It's Congress with the regulations that they write that make our industries less competitive and less productive. So many of the things that we used to manufacture ourselves, many of those things right here in Connecticut, we now import. Why are we no longer efficient? It's not because our wages are too high, it's because our government is too big. The regulations are too onerous and too numerous, the taxes are too high, and we can't compete, and so we're destroying our companies. And because of that reason, I've invested mainly abroad. I've invested in foreign companies, mainly in some of the Asian markets where the governments are not taxing and regulating as much. I own a lot of commodities, we own a lot of energy, we own a lot of gold and silver, ways to protect our wealth from what Washington is doing. But the problem is, as an investor, I certainly can profit in this environment. I have no problem doing that. But as an American, it bothers me greatly that this is what I have to do. And rather than just figuring out how to get rich, from the demise of the U.S., I'd rather try to stop it. I'd rather try to go to Washington and change the policies. And instead of making them destructive to capital, make them conducive to economic growth. If we had sounder policies, if we had fewer regulations, a smaller government, lower taxes, and sound money, then instead of capital fleeing the country, it'd be coming to the country. Instead of exporting the jobs, it would be imported. So I want to see if I can get there. The problem is the things that we need to do are inconsistent with the agendas of politicians. Politicians are in office to perpetuate their own careers. And they don't get reelected by telling the truth. They don't get elected by admitting that there's a problem and trying to solve it. They want to deny that a problem exists. They want to postpone it so they can get reelected one more time. If there's a cancer, they want to put a Band-Aid on it and hope you don't notice, that it's getting worse. But eventually, if you don't treat the disease, you're going to die from it. And that is the problem we're in right now. I think we're going to overdose on government stimulus. What people don't understand is whenever the government stimulates the economy, they actually make it worse. Because they're not stimulating the economy, they're stifling the economy. Government stimulus are actually a sedative. Right? The reason that the economy is in trouble is because the government stimulated. Right? If you go back to the 1990s, we had a stock market bubble. Right? Many of you might have remembered that. Maybe some of you did some foolish things back in the 90s with your money when you bought some of these .com stocks. But the reason that we had that bubble is because the Fed had interest rates too low. Every time there was a problem in the world, whether it was the bankruptcy of long-term capital management, whether it was the fears of Y2K, the Russian debt default, whatever happened, the Asian contagion, 1997, the Fed was always there to bail people out and print money. And all that cheap money went from the Federal Reserve through Wall Street, and it ended up feeding the internet frenzy. And so we wasted a lot of money during that time period. We funded all sorts of crazy companies that never should have started. And I experienced this firsthand because when I got into this business, I was working at Lehman Brothers, the stock broker. I was a retail broker. And I left that, and I was out of the industry for a while because I didn't like it. I thought that the retail investor was getting screwed by Wall Street. I saw how they were getting bad advice, that they were deliberately being put into investments that the brokers knew were no good, but they got paid a lot. I didn't like that. I wanted my clients to come first. So I ended up starting my own company to do that. And early on, I saw this internet bubble. And so what I did to get started, I was cold calling. I was making calls all day long, calling hundreds and hundreds of people every day, trying to convince them to sell their .com stocks. And nobody wanted to. Every once in a while, I got somebody. But most people, it was an argument. Nobody wanted to hear that they weren't going to get rich in these crazy stocks. But I got a lot of customers because, you make enough calls, enough people, and I got people, I saved them, I got them to sell all their NASDAQ stocks, and I protected them. And I built my business, and of course, I kept records of who I called, because after the bubble burst, I called some of the people back who didn't listen to me, and if they had any money left, some of them sent it to me. But most of them remembered the conversations. But, on the way up, it was difficult, because I'd tell people to sell a stock, and then next time I talked to them, they would laugh at me, because it had doubled in price, right? And they thought I was the crazy one, because I wasn't buying. But of course, it was all fantasy land. But when the bubble burst, we needed to have a real recession, because we had to purge the economy of all these crazy investments. All the capital had been misallocated during that boom. The recession was actually the part where the economy was going to correct itself. But George Bush had just been elected president. Rather than leveling with the American public, the solution was, let's stimulate, let's fight off the recession. How did they do that? The Fed slashed interest rates to 1%, and we turned small surpluses into deficits. And we primed the pump Keynesian style. We went deep into debt. And what did we do? We blew up a housing bubble. We convinced Americans to spend trillions of dollars based on a fantasy of real estate riches. Wall Street acted irresponsibly because the government made it so easy to speculate. Right? George Bush said that Wall Street was drunk, and that's why we had a financial crisis. Yes, they were drunk, but Main Street was drunk. The whole country was drunk. The question was, why were they drunk? Because the government liquored them up. Alan Greenspan was the bartender. He force-fed all that moonshine down their throats. That's why they were so reckless. Teaser rates, adjustable rate mortgages, interest-only mortgages, they were only popular because interest rates were at 1%. That's the only reason they worked. And why were so many people able to borrow so much money, even though it was obvious they couldn't pay it back? Because the government guaranteed it. Freddie and Fannie were guaranteeing half of all the mortgages in the country. They were the biggest buyers of subprime mortgages in the world, Fannie and Freddie. They were the most highly indebted companies in the world. They were leveraged 100 to 1 because of government guarantees. Without the government involvement, they never would have been able to guarantee all those mortgages. And without the government guarantee, people couldn't have got in over their heads. Because that was the reason. It wasn't a failure of capitalism. Capitalism would have worked if the government had stayed out of it. But by guaranteeing the mortgages, there was no capitalism. It was, risk-free lending. Lend money to anybody, because if they don't pay it back, the government got you covered. That was the problem. So we combined moral hazard of government guarantees with cheap money, and we had a housing bubble. And we made more mistakes during the housing bubble than we did during the internet bubble. And when that bubble burst in 2008, that was the time to pay back. That was the withdrawal. And we were going to have a much worse recession. But what did the government do? Did the government learn anything from its mistakes? Did Obama learn anything from Bush? Not a thing. Because Obama is repeating every mistake that Bush made, only worse, only bigger. Did Ben Bernanke learn from the mistakes of Alan Greenspan? He's repeating every one. Instead of having interest rates at 1%, they're at 0. The budget deficits. Under Bush, they were maybe $200-300 billion a year. Now they're $1.5 trillion a year. I mean, Bush was the biggest spender since Lyndon Johnson. But now, look at Obama. I mean, he's got, doubled. The government is now spending, the federal government is now spending almost $4 trillion a year. That's more than twice what it spent 10 years ago. How many people thought the government was too big 10 years ago? Yeah, I did. It's twice the size. How can that be? Does every American earn twice as much? Can we afford a government that's twice as expensive? Where are they going to get the money? Where's that money coming from? The government doesn't have a nickel. They don't take from us first. Now, they're borrowing a lot of it now from China or Japan or Saudi Arabia, but what if they want their money back? What if they don't want to lend anymore? Where's the money going to come from? Right? They're going to print it. That's all they're going to do. They're not going to raise our taxes 40%. They are spending $1.60 for every dollar they collect in taxes. We got to pay for that. Right? The cost of government is not taxes, it's spending. We have to pay for every dime they spend, one way or another. The best way to pay for it is with taxes. But the politicians don't want to do that because we've screamed. So they borrow. But then we got to pay it back with interest, which is worse. Or they do the worst thing, they print it. And when they print it, you know how we pay for it? Our savings go down. Our investments lose value. Our pensions, the cash value of our insurance policies, of our annuities, the value of our wages goes down. You want to know why food gets more expensive? You want to know why gas gets more expensive? It's not the OPEC. It's Fed. It's the Fed. It's government debasing the value of our money. And as our money loses value, we need more money to buy stuff. And that's the next crisis. Because the bubble they're inflating right now, it's not a stock market bubble. It's not a real estate bubble. It's a government bubble. And this is the worst of them all, because at least we got some houses out of the housing bubble. We got Google, we got eBay, we got Amazon, we got a few decent companies out of the internet bubble. I mean, sure, there was more damage, but at least we got something to show for it. And the internet is, kind of cool. I use it every day. What are we going to get from the government bubble? Nothing. The only people that are going to benefit from the government bubble are the people who have jobs in the government. In fact, look at government workers. Government workers are now earning twice what private sector workers earn. I mean, how can that be? How can that? They are public servants. How can they earn twice what the people that pay them earn? Right? I mean, I don't pay my employees twice what I earn. I mean, that's crazy. Why are we doing that? As a nation. And we keep increasing their pay. And it's not just on a federal level. Look at all the state workers we keep raising their pay. But the people that are paying the money are taking pay cuts. In fact, every time we raise the wages of our government workers, we all get a pay cut because their salaries are paid by us. See, if someone gets a job in the private sector, I have over 100 employees. You guys don't pay their salary, right? But when the state of Connecticut or the federal government, when they hire somebody, we all pay their salary. Every time that's where the money's coming from. When I got into this business, you talk about understanding, how government inhibits. I said I started my business myself, and now I have, over 100 employees. Well, I got 7 of my employees, and all they do is comply with government rules and regulations. That's it. Nothing. I mean, I wouldn't even have hired them, so it's a complete waste of my money. But more than that, I have people that complain to me, branch managers, brokers, that 2 or 3 hours of their day are spent complying with the rules and regulations that these guys have. I mean, there are so many rules and regulations. The regulations in financial services are now so onerous, there is no way I ever could have started my business when I did. I couldn't have afforded it. It would have been impossible. How could I have possibly afforded the compliance? And who some of the biggest losers are? My clients. Because you know what is the most time-consuming and the most expensive thing I do is spying on my clients. Because of the Patriot Act, because of what happened there with the Anti-Money Laundering Act, I am responsible to make sure that none of my clients are evading their income taxes, And how do I have to do that? It costs me a fortune. Right? I have people that screen everything that my clients do. We have to run them through these databases. We have all these different red flags that we have to look for. And if we find anything suspicious, we got to tell the IRS. And we can't tell our clients, because if we tell our clients that we're telling the IRS, we can be fined or put in jail. It's all, and of course, they said it's about terrorists. There's no, how many terrorists, have brokerage accounts here? It's crazy. I used to joke. I said, you know what? You know how to end terrorism? Let them send their money to Wall Street. They'll lose it all. Why wouldn't we want them to send their money to Goldman Sachs and they'll stick them in these subprime mortgages? Instead, we made all the terrorists buy gold. Now look at how well they're doing, right, by keeping them out. But all these rules, and now they want to add more rules and regulations. This new financial regulation, it's not going to do anything. They're not doing anything about Freddie and Fannie. They're not doing anything about the FDIC. They're not doing anything about the Federal Reserve. In fact, they're giving the Federal Reserve more power instead of taking power away. So they're not getting to the roots of the financial crisis. So when this bubble bursts in government, we're going to have runaway inflation, prices are going to go through the roof, long-term interest rates are going to skyrocket, and we're going to have twice as many people unemployed as we have today. And the bigger problem is, even if you have a job, you're not going to have much to show for it, because the wages aren't going to buy very much. And we're going to turn this country into a giant banana republic. And a lot of people, when I go to a lot of these meetings, they always want to ask me questions about immigration. How are we going to stop illegal immigration? It's a serious issue, but it's a more serious issue to me? Immigration. How are we going to stop the best and brightest Americans from leaving? Because that's what's going to happen. And it's already happening. You go to the top MBA schools, where do the kids want to go? Do they want to go to Wall Street? They want to go to Silicon Valley? No. They want to go to Shanghai. That's where they want to go. They want to leave the country. And in fact, the Americans who want to leave the most are the children of immigrants. Chinese Americans, Indian Americans. There's so many Chinese Americans going back to China right now that China actually has a word to describe them, and it literally translates into sea turtles. And I read this story about it in Business Week, but they asked the kids, why are you leaving? You know why they're leaving? Opportunity. They're leaving America in search of opportunity. That's why their parents came. That's why my parents, my grandparents, all four of them immigrated to this country. My father's parents settled in Connecticut. My grandfather worked on the Yale Bowl. When he came here, he barely spoke any English, and all he had was a couple of bucks in his pocket. There were no welfare workers. There were no food stamps. But you know what else? There was no income tax. There was no federal income tax. There was no state income tax. There was no Social Security tax. The government left them alone. Government, when my grandfather came here, government, state, federal, and local government consumed less than 5% of our GDP. Government was tiny. It was an afterthought. Nobody even cared. And my grandfather was able to start a small little business as a carpenter, didn't even go to high school, never had a big business. He maybe had a couple of employees. He was a skilled manual laborer. But what was he able to do on that? He had a wife. He had 8 kids. My father was the youngest of 8. If my grandmother didn't have a job outside the house, she had help. They owned a house. They bought a car. They had a vacation spot. How can you do that? They had no debt. They retired. All this was possible because there was no government. The reason my grandmother didn't have to work is because my grandfather didn't have to pay all these taxes. But now it's impossible. How is somebody with a high school degree, even a college degree, going to support a wife and 8 kids? You got to be on Wall Street to do that. The average American can't do it. But we could back then. Why? Because the government was tiny. That's the only difference. We've grown the government. The government is such a huge burden. So what I want to do, and this is the only chance we have of turning this thing around, because what the government is doing is blaming the capitalist market, blaming the free market. The reason that I was out there forecasting the economic crisis, I was the only guy, one of the only guys who did it. I wrote a book called Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. I was writing on the internet, doing op-eds, there's stuff all over the place from 2004 through 2008, warning that that the housing bubble was going to burst, that banks are going to fail, that Freddie and Fannie were going to go bankrupt. And I even warned that the government would do the wrong thing and bail them out and try to stimulate the economy by printing money, and that was the real crisis. I wasn't afraid of the bubble bursting. I didn't think the disease would kill us. I knew the government sure would do it. And what they're doing now is vilifying the free market. They're saying that we have these problems because there wasn't enough regulation. If we only had more regulations, we wouldn't have had these problems. If we didn't have the regulations that we have, we wouldn't have had these problems. The free market wouldn't let it happen. The free market has fear as well as greed. Yeah, people are greedy. People have always been greedy. But people also don't want to lose. But when the government makes it so you can't lose, when they try to make it so there's no failure, that you get bailed out if you fail, you got the Greenspan foot. Government guarantees all the bank accounts. Don't worry about what the bank does with your money. Government's going to guarantee it. Don't worry about if somebody can pay back their mortgage. Government's going to guarantee it. Capitalism doesn't work that way. You know, there are a lot of casinos here in Connecticut. They have on these Indian reservations. You know, why aren't we there every day? Why don't we go there every day and gamble? Because we might win, right? Well, people don't go there because they know they'll probably lose. Well, what if the government says, well, if you lose, you get your money back? So if you win, you keep your winnings, and if you lose, you get your money back. Well, you couldn't even get into the casino. They'd be mobbed. Nobody could get it. That's what the government did to Wall Street. That's what they did to Main Street in the housing market. Who thought they could lose money buying a house? Right? It was you couldn't lose. It was impossible. Real estate could only go up. How can people be that stupid? Because they were drunk on government alcohol. That's not going to be that stupid. They were the same people that bought .com stocks, that thought companies that had no earnings could, had billion-dollar valuations. But the free market wouldn't do that. But the government is trying to convince us that the solution is more government. And this is what they do. The government creates a problem, and then they try to solve it with more government. Right? They light a fire, and then they put it out with gasoline. And every time it gets bigger, well, we need more gasoline. We got to change that dynamic because we can't afford that. This country is going to be completely socialized. The government is taking over the auto industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, the healthcare industry, the education. They are, one by one, they are socializing and nationalizing bigger chunks of the American economy. And that is not going to work. It didn't work when the Russians, the Soviets tried it. It didn't work for Fidel Castro. It's not going to work for Barack Obama. I don't care how smart he thinks he is. I don't care how compassionate he thinks he is. It doesn't work. It's an elitist, socialist mentality, and it's permeating Washington, and they are using this crisis to advance that agenda. Somebody needs to go to Washington and actually spell it out. To blame Washington for these problems, to blame socialism, not capitalism. The only solution is to embrace what made us rich in the first place. You know, dance with a girl you brought. We need to go to free market cap. We need to recreate the country that my grandfather came to. Right? The low tax, low regulation, minimal government, rugged individual, laissez-faire, capitalistic economy. That's our only way out of this mess. And it's going to require somebody in Washington who doesn't want to be there, who doesn't care about getting reelected, who's willing to do what needs to be done. And the most important thing that I can do, and I'm going to answer your questions, is I want to stop the increase in the national debt. You know, every year, Congress votes to increase the debt ceiling. The same people that vote to do that, these are the same people who go home to their constituents and say, I'm for a balanced budget. I'm against deficit spending. I'm going to vote for a balanced budget amendment. What does that get us? There is no balanced budget amendment to vote for, and it's never going to be there. That's why it's so easy to be in favor of a balanced budget amendment. Hey, I don't want to talk about balancing the budget. I actually want to balance it. And it's an easy thing to do. It's not hard. It's only hard for the politicians because they think they might not get reelected if they do it. But if I can stop the debt ceiling from being raised, I just need 40 other senators. It's got to convince 40 senators to have some guts and to stand up to Washington and say, that's it, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling. Well, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, the government can't spend more than it taxes. And it has to cut. It can't raise taxes because that's the same. I'll filibuster that the same way. Right? If I got 40 guys that won't let them increase the debt, we're not going to let them raise taxes. So all they can do is cut. And then we change the dynamic. People say, well, let's repeal Obamacare. We don't have to repeal it. Just don't fund it. If there's no money, they can't spend it. If we take away their charge card, they have to cut. Legally, that's all they can do. And then, instead of figuring out, which new government agencies we can add, how about which ones can we get rid of? Right? We have all these government agencies that a lot of them didn't exist when I was born. Why are they here now? When Ronald Reagan ran, he wanted to eliminate the Department of Energy and the Department of Education. Why are they still here? The Department of Energy is a perfect example of how government fails. When they established the Department of Energy, if you remember, that happened in the 1970s under Jimmy Carter. So if you think Carter was a great president, then maybe you like the Department of Energy. But the reason he established it was we were going to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. This government agency was going to help us reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Right? Well, we're twice as dependent on foreign oil now as we were then. Back then we imported less than 40% of our oil. Now it's 70% of our oil.
Yet we're spending $30 billion a year on the Department of Energy. They don't produce a drop of oil. What do they do? I mean, why don't we get rid of it? That's $30 billion we don't have to spend. And there's more departments. It's not just that one. And we got to reduce salaries across the board. We got to cut government spending across the board. And that's the decisions that I want. I want to turn it around. How can we cut? Because that's all they can do. Right now, they've got carte blanche. More government is always the answer. More government, more programs, more regulation. Every time they pass a law, we lose some of our rights or some of our freedoms. That's all they're doing. Congress has spent years and years writing laws. I don't want to write a single law. I don't want to write a single piece of legislation. All I want to do is repeal stuff. I want to dismantle what the government's been doing. The people, they joke, they say, well, you don't have any experience in government. I go, well, yeah, I don't have any experience writing legislation. I don't need it, right? I want to repeal legislation, and I've got the same experience as everybody else, because it's never been done. Nothing gets repealed, right? All in my own business. Every year they pass new laws. They don't say, here's new regulations, but we're going to eliminate the ones from a couple of years ago. No, it's they stack one on another, on another, on another. And that's what's driving all the industries out of business. You can't afford it. But what do these guys care? They don't know. They're in oblivion. They live in their own little world in Washington, D.C., where they're exempt from every rule that they write. All the legislation they pass, they exempt Congress from it. They don't have to deal. Even when they hire somebody, when they hire their pages, they don't have to abide by all the employment rules that everybody else has. So they don't know. They live in a little microcosm. Chris Dodd has been in the Senate for 30 years. What does he know? And then he was in Congress for 6 years before that. He's never worked in the private sector. He has no idea all the damage that his regulations have done. Rob Simmons says, and I trust him, that he says that he voted for a lot of these bad things. He didn't realize how bad they were until he started working as a business advocate. A lot of the politicians, they have no clue what they're doing to this country. I do. I'm just trying to survive. And people don't understand. They say, well, we want jobs. Well, where did jobs come from? How many people, anybody employ anybody? Why do you hire people?
Grow my business.
And you grow your business for what reason?
Make more money.
For yourself. Right. So you're not an altruist. You hire people to make more money for yourself. Right. So do I. Right. I hire people because I want to make money. Right? If I couldn't make money, I wouldn't hire them. Right? And why do people take jobs? How many people have a job? Why do you have a job?
I like to eat.
But
my kids.
why don't you just work for yourself? Why do you work for somebody else?
Because what I do, I think I'm in a bigger organization. I can't
Well, because you lack the capital. Right? You need capital. So if you're a businessman and you how do I have capital? I wasn't born with it. I got nothing from my parents. I had to save my money. I earned nothing for several years while my friends were earning a lot of money. I took a risk. I started a business. I accumulated capital. I built up a reputation. And then once I didn't have any employees until 2000. Nobody wanted to work for me. I didn't have anything to offer. It took me a while to build something that had value. Right? And I'm giving people not so much physical capital. I'm not giving them machines. I was giving them desks, phones, computers, all that kind of stuff. But I gave them a client base. I gave them products. But I combined my capital with somebody else's labor, and in order for me to make a profit. So for businesses to exist, you need two things: you need a profit motive, and you need capital. Because I can't hire anybody unless I have some tools to give them. If I don't have machines or something, and where does capital come from? It comes from savings. And how do you get that? You need low taxes. You need underconsumption. And the more regulations there are, the more taxes there are, the harder it is for me to make a profit by hiring somebody. And you know what? You hire somebody, you're like a villain now. You can get sued a million different ways. You fire somebody, who knows if you're going to get sued? You hire. And you're a villain when you're an employer. So everybody talks about workers' rights. What about the employer's rights? Somehow you lose your rights when you hire somebody. People forget that that's what jobs don't just come created. You need individuals to create them. They need to have a profit motive, and they need capital. And everything we're doing right now is undermining that process. That's why the jobs are going away. So if we can recreate that type of environment in Washington, if I can stop the government spending dead in its tracks, and that's what I'm going to do. I don't want to be a senator. I think it is prestigious, and maybe later in life I might have wanted to do it. I'd rather stay in the private sector. I'd rather be creating wealth rather than being part of an entity that destroys it. But the problem is, there's not a lot of time, right? 6 years, I talk about I'm going to run for one term. Not only because I think that You can't do what needs to be done if you're worried about getting reelected. But if I can't get this done in 6 years, it's not going to get done. Right? It's going to be everybody for themselves. We're going to watch people flee. We're not going to. It's going to be already the Mexicans are already leaving California because there's no jobs. But pretty soon it's going to be the Americans going down to Mexico, and they're going to be worried about us. But so we don't have a lot of time, and I'm not going there. I'm not going to play games. I'm not going there to make friends, to get connections, to get power. I don't need any of that. I'm going there to do one thing, and that's to try to control this government and to try to reverse these policies and to do what's right for the country, to do something that my son can be proud of, that his father helped accomplish. And if you guys will send me there, I promise you that's what's going to happen. I don't know if I will succeed because I'm going to be stepping into the lion's den, But maybe I can challenge people in the right way and find some Republicans to actually remember their principles for a change, to remember why they got elected. I know they talk the talk, but they can't walk the walk because they might be Republicans second, but they are politicians first. And that's why they grow government at every chance they get. But maybe they'll see how bad this is. And the economy is going to get worse. Every year that I'm in office, it's going to get worse. Things are going to get worse. And maybe within the next couple of years, we can do something about it. I can get the critical mass that I need to pull this off. And if there are some senators that won't stand with me in 2010, if there are some Republicans who are going to override my filibuster, then let's get rid of them. Right? Let's get rid of them. If they want to pretend that they care about balancing the budget and cutting government, but they oppose the only way to do it, then let's get rid of them. Let's expose their hypocrisy, and let's make sure that they don't come back. And send me the 40 guys that will stand with me. Anyway, let me take your questions on my policy, my campaign, my strategy, whatever.
So, you sound brilliant about this, and I think that it's, I wish that anyone else in Congress listens to what you have to say. My concern is how do you turn what you just said and educate people who are convinced that the whole financial meltdown was because Washington was asleep and wasn't regulating enough.
No, they weren't asleep.
What I'm saying is, you have 30 seconds, and the news loves to potentiate the fact that somehow, Washington screwed up, they're not describing it the right way.
Well, I'm going to have more than 30 seconds. The thing about being in Washington is a lot of the senators who don't listen to me now, they're going to have to listen to me when I'm in
Well, I'm not talking about being in Washington. That you'll have time. It's getting to Washington. Because you're going to have to convince people in this state when you're going against Blumenthal.
Yeah, I know it's a tough job to get people to understand the truth and to use their brains for a change. But it's not that complicated. You can go back. I in very specific detail went over exactly what was going to happen and why it was going to happen, and then it happened exactly the way I said. And it's not that I'm so smart. I just understood how government rules and regulations and subsidies and how the Federal Reserve was creating this problem. It's all the people that said it was because of the market. They couldn't see it coming. Well, why could if it was because there wasn't enough government? Why weren't there all these people from the left out there saying, "Oh, this is going to be terrible"? Look at all these people who are borrowing money that they can't pay back because of the greedy capitalists on Wall Street. I was saying that this was happening, and I explained why it was happening. So I've got a record of making these accurate forecasts, and so I think that gives more credibility to my argument that the government did it than their argument that the market did it when they didn't see it coming. And some of it is very simple. I just came out with a book, came out 2 weeks ago, called How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. And you can read it in 2 hours, and it's a fairy tale with cartoon illustrations, and it describes economics. And anybody that reads that will understand, how economies grow and how governments destroy them. Will understand the root causes of our financial crisis, why the bailouts and the stimulus are going to fail. There are simple ways to explain this, and I think that's one of my strengths is I can take complicated things and explain them in a simple way. I think so simple that even our congressmen or senators will understand it. And maybe I can show them, look, these guys are listening to people like Ben Bernanke, and I can show where he has never been right. He has got everything wrong. So why expect him to be right now? Why not listen to somebody who's got it right? And I'm not the only one. There are other people who have gotten it right. I just got it right on television. I got it right in books. But I was getting emails from people. Hundreds of thousands. You're saying exactly what I'm thinking. So there were a lot of other people. Alan Greenspan pretends, oh, there are only 3 people in the whole world who figured this out. They're all friends of his, right? No, there were plenty of people. It was only the morons in Washington at the Federal Reserve that couldn't see this thing coming. This was a train wreck headed right for them. I mean, how could they not figure this out? I knew that Freddie and Fannie were going to go bankrupt. I never even looked at their books. All I knew was that they guaranteed half the mortgages, and their equity was like 5%, was tiny. And I knew that just a few defaults would bankrupt them. I mean, it didn't take rocket science. So, it's not going to be easy, but it can be done. And this is the environment, with the Tea Parties, with the distrust of government, with people fed up with Washington. This is when my message might resonate. This is when people are ready for something different. Ready to send somebody to Washington who's not part of this culture. And I think a lot of people are fed up with these government promises. They're empty promises. There's something for nothing. Elect me and I'm going to give you health care. I'm going to give you education. They can't give us anything. They don't have anything, right? They have to take it from us first. And especially in a state like Connecticut, where the government takes so much more than we get back. I said, government aid, it's like, you try to give yourself a blood transfusion from your right arm to your left arm, and you spill half the blood on the floor. If we could just get the government to let us keep our money instead of trying to recirculate through Washington. But who knows? I think I can beat Dick Blumenthal. I think that he's a very overrated politician. Nobody likes lawyers, no one likes politicians, and he's both. And I don't see how, let's take this lawyer politician out of Hartford and transport him into Washington, D.C. What has he done for our state for the last 20 years? Is this the greatest state for business because he's been such a good attorney general? No, the businesses are leaving in droves to escape his lawsuits. He was actually on television saying that lawsuits create jobs. Yeah, for his friends, for the lawyers. They don't. You think they destroy jobs everywhere else, and they destroy businesses. We got 10 times the lawyers per capita as Japan. That alone explains our trade deficit. So do we need to send more to Washington? All these politicians are lawyers. What's he going to do? File more lawsuits? That's his economic plan? Yeah, we're going to sue our way back to prosperity. That's a great plan. Connecticut, we got some of the highest taxes in the country. Per capita debt is the highest in the country. It's the highest. What a record of failure for Hartford. Look what they've done. The state is bankrupt. Look at his little department, Blumenthal's department. It's exploded. Look at all the lawyers. So he specializes in growing government and filing lawsuits. Yeah, that's exactly what we need. Right? So how did he win? As bad as Connecticut is, how can they make that mistake? Right?
Why do most people not realize how heavily in debt Connecticut is compared to?
Because politicians lie. They're doing the same thing as it's like Enron. It's phony accounting. When the government has these hearings, and the government tries to say, Wall Street, they're cooking the books. Nobody cooks the books better than Washington. They'd all be in jail if they were in the private sector. They don't report the national debt. When they report the national debt at $13 trillion, there's so much debt that's off the books. It's off budget. They don't even count it. The $6 trillion in Freddie and Fannie, they don't even count that. They just got an extra $10 billion last week. No one batted an eye. In the last 2 years, I think Fannie Mae, or which one, I forget it, Fannie or Freddie, lost 10 times as much as they made in the preceding 30 years. Are they going to their executives, the guys like Franklin Reigns, that made millions and millions of dollars? For what? For bankrupting those companies. And you know what? They're still paying executives of those companies millions of dollars to lose billions. Come on. My 7-year-old, how could he do any worse? They wouldn't have to pay him millions of dollars. We lost billions of dollars. Yeah, thank you. Give me $5 million for doing that. They got to dismantle these companies. They should have let. Why is the government guaranteeing mortgages? No one even asked that crazy question. Why should people have to have a government-guaranteed mortgage? If you can't afford to buy a house based on your own ability to afford it, then why are you buying it? Why are you putting it? Why is the taxpayer co-signing? 97% of the mortgages now are guaranteed by the U.S. government. That's not the free market. Let people buy houses that they can afford. Let the prices come down. See, what the government wants to do is keep prices propped up so people have to go deep into debt to overpay. Why not let the prices come down so that people can afford the houses? So they don't have to go into debt. The government never wants prices to go down. Why don't they stop student loans? Why don't they stop guaranteeing student loans? So tuitions can come down. So the kids don't need the loans. You know, when my father went to college in Yukon, his parents didn't give him any money. And he didn't borrow any money. And he graduated without any debt. Well, how did he do that? Well, he just had a job. He worked his way through college, like a lot of people used to do. He waited tables in the summer. That's all he did. That's all you needed. You can't do that now. Why is college so expensive? Because the government got involved to make it cheap. The government got involved. We lowered the voting age down to 18, right? And so how did politicians get the votes of the 18-year-old? Promise them something for nothing. Education. We're going to help you go to school. We're going to give you cheap loans. We're going to guarantee your loans. That doesn't help the kids. That helps the universities rip off the kids. Tuitions go up. Tuitions never go down. They've never gone down. Of course, before the government, if you go back and look at some of the tuitions before the government was involved, you can find periods of time. You can go back at Harvard, you can look at Yale. You can see 30, 40-year periods where tuitions didn't even go up, not even by a penny. You know, and they were low. They weren't even expensive. It wasn't until the government got involved. Even in 2008, prices are collapsing for everything. College tuitions went up. Why? Because the government guaranteed loans. If the government stopped guaranteeing loans, they would have to slap. There'd be a 50% off sale, an 80% off sale, because nobody can afford those tuitions without government loans. But the minute you take away the government loans, the colleges, they're not going to close down. I mean, they have a huge auditorium with seats. They got to put butts in those seats. How do you do that? How do the airlines do it when no one's flying? They have a sale. Is there ever a sale at colleges? Do they ever have a sale? No, they don't have to. But if the government got out of it, prices would collapse. Now, what would they have to do? Well, they'd have to go to the professors. You know what? We got to cut your pay. You know what? You actually have to show up. We're going to have to fire your teaching assistants. You're going to have to do the lecture yourself. You know, or maybe we can't have that fancy gymnasium. I mean, if you think about it, when my father went to school, the class size was small. Now we've got huge classes. You know, the professors are lecturing to 1,000 kids at a time. How can it be more expensive? When my father went to school, they didn't have any computers. It was all on index cards. They didn't even have photocopy machines. They had carbon paper. Can you imagine trying to keep track? You know, the professors had a grade. You know, they wrote in blue books, in ink, with pens. They didn't even have a Scantron. Now you can run an entire university with 30,000 kids on a single Macintosh computer. I mean, and with the internet, you know how cheap it should be to educate kids? If the free market was involved in education, can you imagine how cheap it would be? But no, the government won't let it work. Same, you know. So the government never wants the subsidies. We have the healthcare problem. Why is healthcare so expensive? Because the government got involved. Right? It was really cheap before the government got involved. Right? When my father got sick, what happened? His mother called the doctor, and the doctor was there in like 10 minutes. You know, with his medicine bag. You know, and it was cheap. What did they paid a couple of dollars? That was it. It was inexpensive before the government got involved with the subsidized insurance and all the lawsuits. You know, and I'm sure the doctors, it was much more enjoyable practice. You know, when you didn't have to pay all this malpractice, you didn't have all these insurance things and forms to fill out. Insurance was inexpensive. Even in the 1960s, my father sold health insurance in the state of Connecticut. And this is just before Medicare came in, and it was before the government started subsidizing for people to buy their insurance through their employers. You know how much insurance costs for a man, like 25 to 40-year-old man, to get health insurance? Anyone could guess how much the premiums were for a major medical policy? How much per month or per year?
When?
1960, 61, 62.
$40.
$25 a year, $2 a month. Oh, that's what it costs. And my father says that plan had a maximum payment per incident of $5,000. So if you had a heart attack, if you were hit by a bus, you know, it would only pay $5,000. If you paid more than $5,000, then you were out, right? And he said that all the years he sold that plan, nobody ever maxed out. No matter what happened, it didn't cost. No matter how you're in the hospital for 3 weeks, it never cost because it never hit $5,000.
No, it's 6 voters.
And people want to know why drugs cost so much money. It's because of the FDA. I mean, it costs so much to get drugs approved. And there's so much politics involved. I remember this drug that I invested in this company that, you know, one of my failures, it initially went up and then it collapsed because the FDA didn't approve their drug. But they had a drug for arthritis. And I actually talked to people who were into clinical studies. They love this drug. They're like, this is the best. I've never taken an arthritis medicine like this because all the other arthritis medicines had all these side effects. And so they would have to take other drugs to offset the side effects of the drugs they were taking. This was the only thing that had no negative side effects. It was like, these guys loved this. And the FDA, ultimately, after spending all this money, they have these random double-blind. Because you have to prove two things. You have to prove that the drug is safe, and then you have to prove that it's effective. And it's effective, it's very difficult, because you have to have these studies, random double-blind, you guys get a placebo, and it's expensive to do this thing. And at the end, they said that the results were inconclusive, so they wanted to do the study all over again. So the company went bankrupt because they ran out of money. But meanwhile, the reason that it was inconclusive is because Ted Kennedy was on the committee, and Ted Kennedy, you have these other pharmaceutical companies, they don't want this drug competing with their drugs. And they don't want the fact that, they love the fact that their drug has a negative side effect, because then you have to buy the other drugs to offset it. So you have political pressure to kill the drug. I mean, in my opinion, why do we have the government doing that? I mean, you can make an argument that the FDA could require you to prove that your drug doesn't hurt people. But as long as it doesn't hurt people, why not let patients and doctors decide if it works? Why should Washington have to make these companies invest hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars to prove that it works? Why not just let them sell it? I mean, if it doesn't hurt you, right? I mean, let doctors and patients decide. And then the cost would come down. I mean, the government, you laugh, there's so many things the government with all these occupational licensing. There was John Stossel did a show on occupational licensing. And this is all at the state level, but it shows you how crazy it is, because it creates a lot of unemployment, because it makes it hard for people to get jobs, because you got to get a license. But one of the professions that required a license was floral arranging. So if you want to get a job at a florist, just kind of arranging flowers in a pond, you need a license. I mean, what, the government is going to protect us from a bad floral arrangement? I mean, what's the worst thing that happens? I mean, you rearrange them, and then you go to a different florist. I mean, that's like in my industry, right? The government always says, like, why do we have all the regulation in the insurance, in the brokerage industry? To prevent me from ripping off my customers. Well, I don't need the government for that. The last person that would rip off my customers is me. I mean, I care more about my customers than anybody in Washington, because they're my customers. The most important thing for me is my brand. The fact that people trust me. The fact that my clients are happy. They send me more money. They send me referrals. Right? That's how capitalism works. You have the value of a reputation. It's an intangible, but I want to protect it, and no one cares more about it than me. And it's not because I'm such a nice guy. I know that if my clients are happy, I'm going to make more money. And if I damage my brand, now sure, there's always a criminal. There's always a guy that rips off some little old lady, steals her money, and they make it in the newspaper. Oh, this guy ripped them off, put them in a bad investment. Well, you know what? The market ferrets those guys out. They don't get to have 15,000 clients like I do, because they steal from their clients and they don't have that many. And the market gets rid of them. And people do their own homework, and you can buyer beware. You find the brokers that aren't killing, that aren't destroying their clients. But what happens is Washington gets a hold of this little old lady. They put them up on the news. She got ripped off. And now the solution is all this new regulation and all these new rules. And the cost of that dwarfs how much would be stolen, right, by the few crooks that are out there. Because most people aren't crooks. Unfortunately, a lot more of the crooks end up in Washington, because that's where you can really steal. Because as a businessman, I can't force anybody to do anything. Nobody uses my services at gunpoint. They choose my services because they think I have something to offer. Same thing with any businessman. I'm not afraid of a company. They can't do anything to hurt me. All they can do is try to get me to buy their products by offering me the best product at the lowest price. It's government I fear. Government can take my money even if I don't want to give it to them. They can put me in jail if I don't give them my money. They have the power to coerce, the power of force. That's what you have to fear. Right? They want to have new consumer protection agency. Consumers don't need to be protected from businesses. They need to be protected from government. That's the problem. Businesses can't hurt us. Right? All they can do is give us things that we want. And if we don't like them, we don't buy them. Next question. I forgot what the question was. Hopefully I answered something in there.
I answered something. The import to export ratio, so I was 30 years ago, it started going the other way. The history is great. And everybody went up. That's, now from a reality point of view, how do you stop? You're saying that the bubble's going to burst. When a bubble bursts, how are you going to stop the meltdown? We had the Depression in 1929. I don't know if we're in that same situation, maybe worse or not worse. But by cutting jobs, how can you project how far it's going to go down?
Yeah, I understand.
How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be painless, right? I mean, the phony economy has to collapse so that a real economy can replace it. You see, we don't want jobs. We want the production associated with those jobs. I mean, just having a job doesn't mean... I mean, everybody in the Soviet Union had a job, but they were broke. All the slaves had jobs, right? They didn't have anything to show for it. That was the problem with slavery. So we don't just want jobs, we want productive jobs. And right now we don't have that. And right now what we're doing is we're importing the things that the Chinese produce, or that the Japanese, or somebody else. And we don't have the money to pay for it. We have huge trade deficits. This is a fantasy. Eventually it's going to collapse, and we're going to have nothing. So I can't prevent the collapse of the phony economy. I want to accelerate it, because the quicker it collapses, but I want to make sure that something can rise from the ashes. You know, capitalism is dynamic. I mean, look at what we did to Germany and Japan in the Second World War. We leveled those countries. We bombed them back to the Stone Age, and they came back strong. We have infrastructure. We have communication. We have a lot going for us. Right? If we can get the government out of the way, we can rebuild our savings. We can reindustrialize. You know, when the Pilgrims came here, there was nothing. The factories weren't here. We had to build them. We can build them now. We have more technology. It'll be quicker. We can build this economy back a lot faster than the government tore it down. But it's going to take, we have to start. We have to acknowledge that. We can't keep denying these problems exist, because the longer we deny it, the worse they get. And the harder it's going to be to solve them. We're digging ourselves into this deeper hole, so the longer we dig deeper, the harder it is to get out of it.
So we've been digging for some time.
And that's all we do is we dig more. Because no one wants to acknowledge the hole that we're in. But I know that we can get out of it. I mean, the American people, capitalism is dynamic. We have hardworking people. We have smart people. We're not a bunch of profligate spenders. The government turned us into that. The government, it's their policies and their subsidies and they got us to behave this way. It's not in our nature. And so if we get back to that, why is it that people have to leave this country to find opportunity, to find jobs? We have millions of unemployed Americans. Why aren't they working? They're not working because government rules and regulations are inhibiting the process. Now, part of the problem is wages have to fall. They're too high. But unfortunately, that's reality. Wages have to fall. The reason that wages go up is because there's more capital, right? If somebody is digging a ditch and they have a shovel, they can make a certain amount of money. You give that person a bulldozer, and now they can make more money. But they're only making more money because they got a bulldozer. Because labor is more productive when you give it better capital. And so American wages rose throughout the last century because our workers kept getting better and more capital. But the problem is, for the last 10 or 20 years, we haven't accumulated capital. We've let our capital bank deteriorate. So we don't have all those machines behind our workers. So the workers are going to have to work for less for a while until we can recapitalize the country. But right now they're just all unemployed. They can't get, so we have to allow wages to reflect our real productivity. And, we have to allow, the service sector economy to contract, because we have to allow the industrial sector to come back. And, people are going to lose their jobs. I know, but they're going to gain other jobs. But if
people lose their jobs, what are you going to do?
They're going to get other jobs. But, they're going to get productive jobs. They're going to actually make something. But part of the problem is we have to stop consuming all this. We can't keep buying stuff. We can't keep going to the malls and buying things. We don't have any money. We have to save our money. We have to produce things. We have to export. We have to export things to the rest of the world, to the Chinese. Look at the automobile market in China now. The Chinese automobile market is now bigger than our market. But look at it in China. In America, when people buy a car, 85% of the people borrow the money to do it. Right? Which means they can't really afford it. In China, 90% of the people who buy cars pay cash. They don't take a loan. Right? That's how you're supposed to buy things, when you can afford them. We need to make stuff for the Chinese. Export to the Chinese. That's what we have to do. And we have to rebuild our savings. But we can't do that with all these rules and all these regulations and all these taxes that make us uncompetitive. But we can't shrink taxes unless we cut government spending. You have a lot of Republicans that want to say, I'm in favor of tax cuts. Well, tax cuts mean nothing if the government keeps spending, because that's what we have to pay for. And if they're not going to take it in taxes, we're going to get hit with it with inflation, and that's worse. But anyway, if you want to get more information on my campaign, there's these flyers. Go to shiftforsenate.com is my website. And, my headquarters are in Milford. Feel free to stop by. We got a lot of volunteers, but we can always use more. We can use donations, because obviously it's going to be an expensive primary and election. So, I need ammunition. I can't finance it all myself.
We have literature here.
We got whatever those handouts you got there.